Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from or whether you're watching this live or are recording. Again, this will be a session that we are recording at ACUHO-I, so we'll be putting this on our YouTube channel following the session. My name is Spencer Giese. I'm a research education specialist at ACUHO-I, and I have the real treat of getting to continue to work on our virtual roundtable series. This is week 14, so thank you for joining us. Today's topic, return to campus scenario planning for various institution types. This is clearly a topic that is near and dear to many of your hearts, as our registration numbers were off the charts. We had over 500 registrants today. So thank you so much for joining us or for viewing this recording afterwards. We have a number of ACUHO-I resources that I certainly want to point you to before we get started. We've got our online community threads, great way for you all as professionals to connect with one another in the field, share resources, share ideas, and tackle problems. We have our virtual roundtable slate on our YouTube channel, so please take a look there. And if you'd like links and summaries of our virtual roundtables and other COVID-19 resources, we have a dedicated page on our website, so please check that out. And certainly thank you to Brailsford and Dunleavy for being our partner this week on our virtual roundtable series. And also thank you to C&W Services for joining us today on this session. A few notes before we get started. Again, this is a conversation. We're gonna have a panel. There'll be an opportunity for you as audience members to submit questions in our Q&A forum. So please be active members, active participants if you are joining us live. When you put something in the Q&A, if you could put your name, institution, position, that just helps everyone connect with one another more. And just to make sure that you're hearing us loud and clear, you're seeing people on camera, if you can just hit your raised hand function and just show that everything's coming through clear on your end. You're hearing us, you're seeing us. You should see a number of panelists' videos. You should be hearing me, and I'm seeing a lot of hands rise up, so that is a good sign. Please note on Zoom, especially with a panel as large as today's session, you have a number of viewing options. So take a look at your Zoom menu. There should be what I like to call the tic-tac-toe board. That grid will allow you to see more of our panelists at once. And you also can manipulate where you have those videos on your screen, so you can both see our content through the slides and see the videos. So take a look into that, but we've got a number of panelists that I'm excited for you to meet. But first, I want to send it over to Jeff Turner. Jeff is the Executive Vice President at Brailsford and Dunleavy, and he's going to be serving as one of our moderators today. So Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, Spencer, and thanks to all the folks, Mary and the entire ACUHO staff, for being such leaders during this turbulent time for the industry. So thank you for that. We're certainly all disappointed it won't be in Portland, Oregon, but we'll all be there in full force next year in Columbus, Ohio for the national conference. So thank you guys for everything you do for the industry. I want to start with a poll question. If everybody can see the question up here, we are going to ask you to answer this question in terms of how well prepared you are and how comfortable you are for the fall. This is all anonymous. Be honest about it. We made it with 4 answers, so you can't have a neutral. You got to be on one side of the fence or the other here, just to get a sense where everybody is today from their thoughts about where they are for the fall planning. I think we had over 500 people respond, so we'll see how the results are for the survey in terms of how many people will respond A, B, C, or D. Okay, so this will help us be prepared in terms of what we're going to talk about today, but it looks like 57% feel they're somewhat well prepared and some are comfortable with their approach for the fall. So that's really great to see. And only 8% are not very prepared for their approach. So thank you guys for taking that survey. And again, all this information will be available after the session today. So I'd like to introduce the panelists. Again, my name is Jeff Turner. I'm an Executive Vice President with Brailsford and Dunleavy. Been working in higher ed for over 25 years, if you could believe it, over 500 campuses, and excited to be back here today to talk about this important topic.
Right, and thanks, Jeff. This is Brian Reyes. I serve as the higher education sector leader for C&W Services. We're a provider of integrated facilities management, campus solutions, but I also participate within the higher education advisory group of our parent company, Cushman & Wakefield, a leader in global real estate services. So we're thrilled to be represented here to support your collective efforts to make sure that you can return to campus safely and effectively.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Ann Meng. I am the Director of Student Housing Operations and Planning at Denison University. We are a small, fully residential, private college in Central Ohio, just outside Columbus. We are about 2,400 beds.
Hi, I'm Maggie Evans, and I'm at William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I am wrapping up my third year at William & Mary, 34 years in the field. We are a small public institution in Virginia, housing about 5,000 students.
Hi, everyone. I'm Henry Velez. I'm the Vice President of Institutional Planning and Operation of Business Services at Rutgers University. We have multiple campuses in New Brunswick, and Piscataway is our flagship campus. We also have housing operations in our Camden and our New York campuses. In total, we have just shy of 19,000 beds system-wide, and I've been with the university for just a little bit over 27 years.
Thank you, Henry. And this group was put together very intentionally. Collectively, those institutions have been in the business for over 750 years, if you could believe it, led by William & Mary since 1693. And as I always say, these schools are going to be around a lot longer than anybody on this call today. And not only in terms of their longevity, but also in terms of the types of institution, from a small private to a large public, with, I think, the largest housing program in the country at 19,000 beds. So we're excited to have everybody for today's conversation. Briefly on the agenda, we want to talk a little bit about learning outcomes. That's very key to these sessions. But get really mostly to the questions. I want to get to the panelists, talk about what they're seeing, and open up for Q&A. The learning outcomes, we want to make sure we focus on things to consider for the fall as you're identifying opportunities to open the campus, looking at de-densification, and of course, response applications and learning from our industry leaders. Some of you have seen this data. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It changes daily, of course, but in early May, as many of you know, Cal State, the largest system in the country with 23 campuses and 500,000 students, came out and said they're going to primarily go online. And you feel after that every school is kind of follow suit. But actually, no, after that announcement, most schools have gone to looking to planning in person with 67%. Of course, these things change daily, it seems like, but most schools are looking to open up in some form or fashion in the fall. This data was asked by the Chronicle in terms of industry leaders, I think about 400 surveys about what conditions would be required to open in person. And of course, the number one was increased cleaning protocols at 92%. And you can see the list all the way down. It was a good survey done by the Chronicle. And by the way, I'm going to have a new business after this, making signs. Apparently, that's who's making out this whole economic situation, is making, everybody needs new signs for everything. So that will be Turner Signs moving forward. We'd like to provide some general source of guidance as you go through your planning. And of course, many are familiar with some of the national pieces as well as regional, local. And then it's important for everybody on the call to look at their institutional priorities, not only from the president's statements, but your strategic plans. And even many of you who have current student housing master plans, we always like to say that, sure, we're planning for the fall, but what can we do that could also help us long-term? So we could do some improvements for the fall, but also make sure we keep a long-term perspective. I also want to highlight one other fact that's out there related to some of the private operators that put together readiness guides. COCM and ACC came out early with readiness guides. It was really great to see the industry come together. We put together a readiness guide as well with Cushman & Wakefield. We're all in this together to provide valuable resources for the entire industry. I wanted to provide a couple samples here of what we've been working with schools on these de-densification scenarios. I think it's sort of almost ironic, and I know many people feel the same on the phone today, which is that I spent 25 years of my career focusing on building community and campus life and having students connect with each other. And now I spent the last 3 months planning on how to do exactly the opposite of that. I feel a little bit like George on Seinfeld, who's, let's just do the opposite. So there's so many different options out there. This was some samples that we've done for one institution where, of course, the two bookends, one being the housing is closed, which we all know in this call, housing really has never been closed because of the sensitive population. Some people had nowhere else to go, so beds really were never closed. To the other end of the bookend, business as usual, where you're fully operational. And then we've been working, like many of you, on hybrid scenarios, whether it's all singles, whether it's focused on indoor air quality and looking at whether you have operable windows and what's residence hall, whether you have a 2-pipe or a 4-pipe system. No triples, of course, or quads. And then I want to talk a little bit about this household unit concept that people have been talking about, the notion that the students on a floor, for instance, are a family or a household, and it's like your household at home, that they live kind of within a bubble and they're comfortable sharing bathrooms and the like. So we've been spending a little bit of time on that. Many people will probably ask in the Q&A where the number of 20 comes from. It's sort of, everybody has a little bit of a shot in the dark on that, but we're trying to do intentional and right planning to make sure we're okay in terms of social distancing moving forward. And then, of course, here you see the revenue implications, which, of course, health is paramount, but it's important to know the budget implications.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And as the CDC guidelines, throughout the country, there's various options. And there's a spectrum of risk factors. And there's going to be examples where low risk or high risk are going to be maybe deployed. But what we've found in the planning discussions with this group is somewhere in the middle. There's going to be a balance towards the middle. And it's important to understand that where you fall on the spectrum will have a financial impact. So having a clear understanding of where you want to sit and why, and then how you're going to manage your budget accordingly. I think you'll hear from Carrie Ann, Maggie, and Henry on how they're accomplishing this for their institutions. And then regardless of where you land in these scenarios, there's a couple of essential things you want to focus on. Either you're doing it today or what things you'll think about. And Jeff alluded to this earlier. There is a readiness guide that's been collaborated on. You'll have access to download the link, but the 6 buckets that you want to think through, I'll just give you some highlights. Preparing the staff is things about training them on COVID-19 prevention best practices, training them on your institution's policy, encouraging telework or social distancing best practices wherever you can, and then develop the move-in and emergency response procedures in advance. To prepare the property, think about things like the 6-foot social distancing plan. What are the de-densification plans? Where is signage going to be posted? What is the traffic flow that you want to design? Making sure that you're allocating and communicating to those folks who are going to be using the assets and the facilities. To develop the property access and the protocol, things to think about are, what's the flow for elevators? How are you going to manage that? Are you going to have dedicated entrances and exits to classrooms and buildings? And then things like package pickups and deliveries. So making sure those protocols are in place. Obviously, you want to maintain the resident experience. So you've got to be frequent communication on visitor guidelines and how the engagement of residents are going to be promoted even in a whole new scenario. From a maintenance perspective, you do want to look at reduced touch points. Use mobile technologies where you can so that you're minimizing touch. And then finally, leveraging technology where you can to make sure that the operations are efficient, but you're responding to those needs. It's going to be a new situation. There's going to be some questions, and you want to be leveraging the technology to do that. And this grid here is very busy, and it's just a reference example. I'll just point out on the left what you see in the purple boxes, space planning best practices based on the international building codes of how many square feet per person. And then the column to its right is if you had a capacity restriction of 50% to 25% in order for safe spacing. What does that look like for every amount of square foot as you grow from the small spaces to large spaces? Think about this as not how to police and monitor space, but what are some of the things you can do within the space to help align on these people per square foot? So let's take study rooms as an example. If you have 100 square feet, you can only have 2 people in the room, you don't want to have 4 chairs. So 2 chairs to match the space. And then if you think of community lounges, not only do you want to have the right number of seating, but what style of seating? Is it going to be couches and sofas versus individual seats? So those are the kinds of facility changes you can make using this type of a tool. So a lot of work to go into how to set the spaces up to be successful for the spacing moving forward, but just a nice quick tool. So as we said earlier, we want to get to the panel and talk to them about what they're doing and share their experiences. So these first 2 questions are really bundled together. So I'll ask Carrie Ann to start, but so what's your campus's current thinking related to the fall opening? And then what is the plan for the residence halls for the fall?
Well, we're sure just going to do it. We're going to open up this fall. Our announcement goes out tomorrow to our campus, and we are doing the typical model that we're hearing sort of broadly right now, which is backing up our start date to an earlier time in August, really limiting early arrivals and focusing on the academic mission. So we're a little bit different. We are a fully residential campus and we're a liberal arts institution. So when students chose us, they did it because they wanted to live with us, and that was a critical part of their experience. So we are looking to retain that for them. It is part of our mission to create autonomous thinkers. So we have not yet established a ceiling on how many students we will take in housing, and we are instead referring folks back to their home medical practitioners if they need to discuss whether coming back is right for them. And we are being a little bit more liberal in how we administer our commuter policies for students who just want a different experience, maybe for the semester. We hope that this will result in some decompression, some de-densification, whatever phrase you like to use. And we're kind of prioritizing that in 3 ways. We would like to have in-house quarantine and isolation spaces. So we will first seek to create really dedicated areas for those. We have some, but we would like some more. So we will use de-densification first to empty out a couple of buildings or wings. And then from there, we will hope to get folks out of triples. For the most part, our suite style housing creates some of the family units that were referred to before, where we've got 6 folks to 1 restroom, and they select housing together. So we are building in some agreements around, be mindful about who you select housing with. And we're also building in some language about just being nimble in general this fall and being willing to consolidate and move around and being flexible. And I am referring to it with my staff as the semester of 2 duffel bags. And sometimes we are the semester of 2 U-Hauls. So this will be a big change to implement, but we feel pretty good about it.
Great, thanks, Carrie Ann. Maggie, from your perspective.
Yeah, I think a lot of similarities to what we've heard from Carrie Ann. William & Mary is feeling positive about calling students back to campus in the fall. We are, as Denison, still in the planning stages and hoping to make a final announcement tomorrow. Looking at probably a shorter fall term, as many campuses are across the nation, and trying to leave things, get students away from campus for the winter, for a very long winter break. With the help of Brailsford and Dunleavy, we have identified several density scenarios that you saw outlined in the slides. And once that academic calendar is finalized, we'll settle on a final plan, but are trending toward keeping a good percentage of double rooms on campus and stepping up expectations surrounding distancing, PPE, and increased sanitizing protocols. We did complete a survey of our contracted students regarding their comfort levels with sharing rooms and bathrooms and common spaces, and their willingness to adhere to a variety of new protocols such as wearing face coverings and all those distancing and sanitizing and hygiene. And our results were overwhelmingly positive on the part of the students. On all of the questions, our range, most reported compliance at levels between 85 to 96%. And at this point, I think in order to get out of their parents' homes, they're willing to say anything that, yes, we'll do whatever it takes to come back. But I think that I feel very positive about their results and that they are comfortable considering their roommates and their floor mates as a family unit. And I'm confident they'll be pretty compliant about what this new life is going to look like on campus, because it will be much different.
Great, thanks, Maggie. Henry, from your campus.
So at Rutgers, we're still running various scenarios, getting our plans put together. A lot of it is going to be depending on our academic plan as well. So we are not as far along yet as my colleagues are on the panel list, but we are putting our plans together. We do know for sure that regardless of where we're going to end up, we know there's going to be a big reduction in the amount of students we're going to have on campus. So you can, traditionally, we're anywhere between 97% and 102% full. With the last couple of years, we've had a number of our first year students in overflow spaces throughout our campuses. So we know in order to live up to some of the CDC guidelines, we know we're going to have a pretty big reduction. And we're modeling anywhere as low as a 20%, depending on our campus location, to possibly going up to 50 or 60%. One of our biggest challenges is because the size of our system with 19,000 beds, we have roughly about 45% of that stock is older traditional style room buildings with center hall bathrooms. About another 45% are made up of apartments, and about 10% are suite styles. But out of all that stock, about 85% are double occupancy rooms. So that poses somewhat of a challenge for us to kind of say we're gonna stick with these the CDC guidelines. We have to really be careful how we want to plan, and that's going to be a challenge. So we're making our plans. We are also looking at possibly what other options may exist from a standpoint of relooking our housing contracts. Like some of you have said before, there's an opportunity to make sure that we have larger groups sign up. In some of the apartments, we have 4 individuals to sign up together. But it's going to be a challenge. And we also have to keep in mind some of our buildings are high rises, right, with elevators and some of the guidelines we're trying to see, there's restriction on how many individuals could be in an elevator at any given time. So those are all the pieces that we're looking at, and the scenarios are based on that. But until we have our academic plan really shored up, we're waiting to see how the housing is going to follow along with that.
Yeah, and of course, Rutgers, New Jersey, Henry, as you know, has been certainly one of the ones that's hardest hit throughout all this. You've got urban campuses with Camden and Newark. And, the unique thing about Rutgers is that a lot of students come from New Jersey, and from an economic standpoint, right, with people losing their jobs, that a lot of students will even opt to just commute versus live in the residence halls.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, and those are the things that we're starting to see. So we're seeing a drop in the number of applicants already from where we normally are in the first week of June. So we've seen a pretty significant drop in the number of applicants, and a lot of it, like you just mentioned, has to do 2 points. There's a lot of uncertainty between families of saying, am I going to let my son or daughter move in on campus? And none of it, it's the economic impact that this part of the region is having.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about facilities. There are a lot of people planning different things, from taking certain fixtures offline to taking furniture out of some of the lounges. Again, things that 6 months ago everyone on this phone would never even think about doing, but we are where we are. What are the other things your other residents will see this fall? Carrie Ann, with your freshman class coming in, what are some of the other things they're going to see this fall?
Now, we are relying on that kind of natural decompression to happen, with families making decisions about whether or not their students will come back to a residential campus. So I mentioned that, and we hope to get everybody down to kind of double occupancy levels, but we have opened at 99% occupied for the last 8 years. So we're in a very lucky position compared to some folks who don't have those kinds of numbers. Today's focus and most of my meetings were the changes to social spaces and what that looks like. We have a whole party registration system at Denison, and so it's a hot topic right now. And so lounges are also being put under consideration for classroom spaces when possible. And so that's a change that students might notice in their residence halls. I have lamented for a long time that our residence hall lounges are in some instances pretty underfurnished. And today, as I was considering that, I thought, maybe this is perfect now. So
Right.
I think we'll be patterning out some lounge layouts with either tape on the floor, kind of published maps on the walls. Jeff, you mentioned new signage, so that things can
signs.
yeah, so that things can be re-signed and reset very often during cleaning.
Maggie and Henry, let me ask you about the quarantine space situation. I mean, certainly, again, nobody knows. I know ACUHO with their task force and has been doing some information on this I've seen 5% of beds, 10% of beds. Of course, Henry, you have the academic medical center with the hospital right there. Talk to us a little bit about any thoughts about quarantine or any other thoughts from your campuses.
It's been a challenging discussion because there hasn't been any really solid guidance on the number of beds to hold aside. So in communicating with a lot of my colleagues across the Commonwealth of Virginia, at any given point, that percentage has ranged from 2% to 6%. So we're settling between 2 and 3%. And we were fortunate enough that a couple of years ago, and right now I use the word fortunate, it's usually not a word I use in regard to this particular building, but we have a very well-aged motel that came into our inventory about 3 years ago that actually works well in regard to both quarantine and isolation needs, in that all of the entrances are exterior. They all have private bathrooms. So ideally it'll work for that space, and it's not our most popular housing. So we're shuffling our assignments a bit and holding that building open to manage both quarantine and isolation. And in terms of load shifting on campus, our summer conferences and events team is going to be managing that for us, so that I don't have to find staff to manage that on top of their regular work that needs to be completed. So because they were being underutilized, since we don't have summer conferences and are not inviting off-campus events into our bubble, they're going to work with us and help us with that. So I think for a bad situation, we've made the best of managing that and trying to be creative in how we meet those potential needs.
So we're doing the same. We are making sure we set spaces aside for quarantine, and we want to make sure we have those accommodations ready. I think for me, what my colleagues in residence life and student affair remind me is one of the things that I really think the students are going to see a big difference is on some of the policies about, whether it's going to be guest policies and some of the other policies that are usually are seen within the residence halls, I think are going to be more stringent. So, they remind me that those policies are being relooked at. We know our housing contracts are going to be modified. We're going to put some terms and conditions in there to let the students know before they sign up for housing. They understand there's going to be restrictions. There's risk associated as well. So those are all things that are going to change. So besides the physical changes that the students are going to experience, there's also going to be quite a bit of policy and guidelines that are going to need to be updated.
There was even a couple of questions, there's tons of questions coming in related to the mailroom and getting mail. Any thoughts about delivery and and those types of things into each of the halls? Everybody's got their own system related to that, but curious on your thoughts on that topic.
So at Rutgers, we're fortunate. We moved to a locker system several years ago in most of our areas, where packages are centrally delivered into a mail locker, and students get a text message basically notifying them that you have a package at X location. They get a PIN, they go there, they have up to 24 hours to retrieve their package, and that limits the amount of packages that are going directly into a residence hall that need to be managed by ResLife Staff or housing staff.
I'll jump in on some of the other questions I saw real briefly on the
Sure.
Q&A, but we are going to be requiring face coverings outside of their bedrooms and bathroom. We are going to be limiting items that students can bring for check-in, and so the big futons and tufted headboards need to stay home, and we are going to at least temporarily eliminate guest and visitation privileges until we can see what the spread of the virus and what the health situation looks like.
I agree with that, and I do want to put a special call out. I hope folks are thinking also in terms of a social compact in addition to, firming up policy. And so we're spending a lot of energy on working with a student group on campus. There are research, education, and design core of students, Red Core is what we call them, and they're doing research of students on what will get buy-in. And we're spending as much time fostering that buy-in as we are updating our policies, because we know that a policy doesn't mean a whole lot to students. And there are tons of questions in the Q&A about, well, how are you going to enforce this? And what about enforcing things in an area where you've got quarantine folks and isolation folks? And so I think relying on those family units for some accountability, and also just a really strong social compact going into fall and how to make it a thing among students is a good way to spend some energy this summer.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts, related, of course, liability, indemnification related to changes to the housing contract? Has that been a topic of changing the language in your housing contract with the students?
Yeah, so Jeff, we're definitely going to revamp our housing contracts, or at least add an addendum to them, because we know this has given us an opportunity, to be honest with you, to give a fresh look. Those agreements haven't been looked at for quite a long time. And that's one of the takeaways out of this pandemic, is that, this is something we should be reviewing. If it's not every year, every 3 to 5 years, we should be reviewing these housing agreements and modifying them, because, the campus life has changed over the years, and our contracts haven't necessarily reflect some of those changes. So we are definitely doing that. We have to point out the risks. We are a campus that, again, we have a heavy on-campus population, but we know many of those students during the weekends tend to go off campus, right? They're either going back home because a lot of them live within an hour of the campus. A lot of them have friends in other institutions in this region, and they go visit them as well. And there's a lot of off-campus activity that these students like to go to. And, that creates some concerns for us as well, because we can't control every step of where the students are and where they've been during times of the day and the weekend. So that's another concern that we have.
Okay, great. Whenever you work with ACUHO-I, of course, it's about professional development and getting better. And it's very important for housing professionals to use these opportunities to advance their development. I know, Henry, you came from the housing background and now have moved all the way up to a vice president of campus services. Has housing played a key role in these discussions? What's been the decision-making process? Talk to us a little bit about that. Carrie, in a smaller school, you probably have less bureaucracy, right? You don't have 3 AVPs between you and the VP, but talk to us a little bit about how housing's played a role in these decision-making.
Yeah, this is, again, one of those things where it's just great to be a residential college sometimes, because they have no choice but to include you in the conversation. So
Right.
I've been pretty involved since the beginning, because bringing students back involves just thinking about hoteling them essentially the whole way through the experience. So someone asked in the chat some questions about, like, are you doing staggered move-ins, etc. And so from the moment they arrive, we know that they are going to spend just as much, probably more time outside of their room as they are in their room. And so I've been grateful to be a part of the conversation, not just in terms of like, what is your bed capacity and what can you make happen, but also what are the realities of life on campus after 5 p.m. and what does this mean to bring them back? And so I've been grateful for that opportunity. I've been at Denison for 8 years, so I feel like I have a pretty good grip on the 24-hour cycle of the college campus where I work. But it has been fun and exciting to be a part of the decision-making process. And also, you really got to be comfortable speaking truth to power sometimes and being realistic. And I know that's tough, but I think we have no choice right now.
I would echo that. Beginning March 16th, our president created a work team called Cabinet Plus that added about 45 people to her leadership team. And I've been participating in meetings twice a week through April. And so housing has really been at the table throughout the entire planning process. And I think because we're a highly residential campus, we've necessarily been at the forefront of those discussions. And one of what we do is manage where people go and how to move people around. And so I think that those skills have been acknowledged and used. And I led a team, a campus-wide team on density for the whole campus, including classrooms, administrative space, outdoor space, and residential spaces. So I think there's a good understanding of and a value to the talents that housing staff bring to this type of planning. And it was utilized from day one on our campus.
Henry, your thoughts?
Yeah, so Jeff, as you know, our executive vice president and chief operating officer is actually the champion for us here at the university, who really led the task force to manage the crisis here on our campuses, and he's also leading the task force that is helping us to get our campuses repopulated. And because the housing portfolio falls under institutional planning and operation, which he heads up for us, we've had a lot of interaction there and a lot of say. And we've had our colleagues in student affairs, our colleagues in residence life. They've been heavily involved in helping put plans. And as we continue to move forward over the next couple of months, those groups become very critical and are key to helping us get our residence halls ready. So for sure, we've been heavily involved and have been at the table. And certainly, like I mentioned before, the academic plan is key for us to kind of know how we're going to set up. But it's also important for us as a group, as we've been informing the academic colleagues of ours, to know, what's our capabilities, what's our capacity, because a lot of times they're not necessarily focusing on our residence halls. They know we have them, and it's always been a great luxury to have, but they don't necessarily understand the capacities and some of the limitations we have. So it's good to all be at the table and having those open discussions so that we can put a good plan together as we move forward.
It's interesting. I was on a call with a client recently who said, I've never spent as much time coordinating with parking and dining and athletics and all the other services. I feel like we're coming together through this, united, and the silos have sort of broken down. Have you guys got that sense that people, even though they're all working in their basement like me here, but that they've actually spent more time collaborating than they have in the past?
Yeah, that's very true. We found that tremendously here at Rutgers. I mean, we've always been a close working group, but times like these brings us closer together, and there's a lot of discussion and coordination that takes place. As you know, we have a major bus system here at the university, and that complicates matters for us as well. So, like you said, Jeff, all of this has to be well coordinated, and we have to all be on the same page. Our dining operation is big here at the university as well, and they have their unique challenges that we have to kind of be aware of and make sure that we're all kind of moving forward together.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And at an institution as old as William and Mary, while I would never wish a pandemic on anyone, we have really learned a lot about moving outside of those silos. And I think that really acknowledging that change is perhaps easier than some of us might have imagined going into this. And people have been pushed outside their divisions and units like never before in very positive ways. So I think there'll be a lot for us to take away from this. And our students are brilliant and engaged, and I just can't wait to see how they return to us and how things change and are different, because I think that there will be a lot of incredibly positive and a lot of efficiencies that come out of this that we wouldn't have been bold enough to really consider before.
We're getting a lot of questions about staff, RA training, about how the ResLife staff are going to operate in the fall. Can you talk a little bit about RAs and other student staff, and what are the thoughts related to that?
Yeah, we are planning to bring our community advisor staff back just as planned. Actually, their arrival date coincides really well with our new potential calendar, so that will be fine. They will do a hybrid online training and then some in-person follow-up. I wrote down, you might see me taking notes from time to time, that I do want to discuss more deeply with our team about the concept of reluctance to engage with policy violation, or even just like to talk to your residents. So I want to think more about that. And again, hopefully we can encourage our staff to use that autonomous thinking that we ask them to develop in their 4 years, to think about whether this is the right role for them in this specific fall. So thank you for the folks who asked that question. That gave me something to think about.
Okay, let's talk about leadership. And as many of you have worked with me through the years, while we're going through the short term, and I said it early, these schools are going to be around a lot longer. And what can we learn from this in terms of making us better as an industry moving forward? So Henry, you and I have worked the longest together on this, and we're always looking at, we have a saying, better is better. What has Rutgers learned from this, and what are you going to use from this to make the institution stronger moving forward?
So, there's a lot of good takeaways from what we've been facing, getting through this crisis and getting prepared for what the future holds. And I think the one big takeaway for me is that as much as you think you have all your plans set up, and when something comes, you'll be able to kind of open up those plans and start initiating them. Something like what just happened to us here with this pandemic shows you can never do enough planning, because I can assure you, we were not ever would have thought that we would be in these situations where, basically 95% of our resident students will be sent home on a moment's notice, and along with faculty and staff. And so, being agile and being able to take the experience and the experts from around your campuses is critical during these times. And, I think for me, it's been about being able to sit back and listen to all the areas that have had input into how do we address this pandemic, how do we get ready for the next steps. That to me, being agile and learning that, your plans will never be 100%. You always have to be able to move on a moment's notice, and having that ability to be agile and react to them is key. I also feel that, and Jeff, this, we've always talked about as we've looked at new residence halls over the last several years here, and even some of the plans we were looking for the next few years, we've always talked about having a lot of flexible spaces. And I think that's one thing that, I've taken a lot of thought over the last few months, thinking about, boy, we really have to continue that pace of how do we create much more flexible spaces for situations like this, where we have to, whether they're setting up quarantine spaces, we have to think about how to continue to use that flexibility in our spaces. And I'm sure the architects are going to be hard at work, and what's going to be coming out over the next several months and years is going to change a lot of the ways we start thinking about how our residence halls are going to be built in the future, and possibly how we need to start thinking about doing renovations and modifying our current stock.
but you don't see, Henry, a scenario where we're going to all go to single rooms with no common spaces and everybody's going to be isolated from each other. And your sense, obviously, flexibility, but some of the things that we learned about building campus community and having students collide with each other in the residence halls, we're hoping that will remain.
I mean, my sense is this, Jeff. I think we were already starting to see the demand for more single spaces as the years go by. So, and I think that's going to continue. The part about having the social components, the lounges, how do we build community? I certainly hope we're not going to get away from that. I mean, that's one of the key things that we do, and one of the key things we promote and we sell to our students, right? Besides the key of getting your education with us, we also talk about your experience, and that experience, that college life experience, is so critical. And I think we will all agree that, you know, it forms a lot of our lives in our future. We make great friendships here. Many of us meet your significant other for your college career, and that ability to continue to have the social aspects that campus life is key. And I mean, I certainly hope we're not going to get away from that. But I do think when these things come, we are going to have to be able to have some flexible spaces for sure. But I certainly think we're going to continue to have, you know, the campus life for quite a long time. At least that's my perspective.
Maggie, from your perspective, and you and I joked about it, which was, you know, you have less common spaces than most residence halls because your halls are so old and the campus has been around since 1693. And actually kind of, unfortunately, serves you well a little bit in this situation because you don't have those common areas. But where do you see this going in terms of the future of designing halls and things like that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, we've seen a trend over the last couple of, you know, 10 to 20 years about more privacy and students wanting singles. So I'm not sure that will necessarily change. But I've also been really buoyed up by our students telling us we want to be together, and we need to be a community. We need to convene our bodies and our minds and our learning, and doing that virtually. You know, for some people that works, but there is really a cadre of students that being together to grow their minds is critical. And so I think that we need to continue to see and review ways that we can do that. For us, this has been a real exercise in trust for all of our teams across campus, that you know, the academy has been built so long upon, we need to gather all the data and have all the information before we make a decision. And so this has been a great exercise, and, you know, we can make decisions, and we can make really good decisions that support our students and our community without having 100% of the information to do that. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I have, is that, you know, we have to continue these conversations and really continue to build the trust and the expertise that we have together as a group.
It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie Ann, I know you have a new residence hall opening up here in a little bit. Give us your crystal ball of your thoughts about housing moving forward and how we can get better as an industry.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty affirmed about our housing master plan that we worked on with Brailsford and Dunleavy. We really dug into our unit types, and our buildings are super historical in nature as well, and they have really interesting room configurations, and some of it is like, oh my gosh, we can't wait to move into that experience, and some of it is like, this is just not working, and it hasn't worked for a long time. So I feel simultaneously affirmed that we're headed in the right direction, and also I feel the need to just look at things and say, okay, so maybe that needs another review, another layer of review. And when we engaged in our housing master plan, we did so much work with students to get design charrettes and all of that. And I am sincerely most curious about what they will think and what this next wave of students will think about all of this as it comes to pass and what they will want as a result. We've also seen an increase in single room requests, and we lean really heavy on our big A accommodation process to manage those things. But I wonder how much students will just say, no, we want something a little more private, and rightfully in the name of agility, right? And being able to adjust to new and unforeseen circumstances. I think things would be a lot different if we had students in single housing the whole way through. But I don't know that that's right for Denison or for most college environments, like Henry and Maggie said.
Absolutely. So this notion, I know everybody's saying, who I talk to in the world of higher ed, that they say, well, this could be acceleration of real change in terms of every student wanting to study online and not live on campus and not be part of a residential experience, that they're going to all just have a bunch of Zoom calls like this 8 hours a day. Do you see that shifting the mindset of today's 18-year-olds? They really want to learn in a digital format like this?
I'll tell you, Jeff, I have a 19-year-old daughter at home, and she just started her first year this past September. And every single day she asks me, when can I go back? It's like I remember when she was little and we would go on a trip, and she would start asking, are we there yet? That's how it feels now with her. She can't wait to get back. And I don't know about 20 years from now, what the generation's gonna want as an experience. But I think, I can speak for some of the students that I've spoken to in recent months, and my student and my daughter and her friends. They're all dying to get back. And I've heard Carrie Ann and I heard Maggie kind of say the same thing. That students want to get back and they want to be on campus.
Not to get too personal, but from a parent perspective, how do you feel about that? And it's a little off topic here, but just so the group, we got a big group here, but your daughter, New Jersey's been hit pretty bad, as we know. How do you feel about it?
And my wife and I, we talk about it quite frequently. And if my wife and I had to make a decision today, I'll be quite honest, we wouldn't feel comfortable, not with what we know right now. In a couple of months, maybe it will be different, but based on where we are, the region, the school that she goes to, she's attending a school that is not too far from home, but it's not Rutgers, and it's a great school. But it's an area that's been heavily hit by the pandemic, and it's something that as parents, has us concerned. And we know how 19, 20-year-olds are. They want to be out with their friends, and they want to go out and do the social activities that they've enjoyed, and that concerns us. Now, she is 19, going to be 20 in a few months, and she has a say in this as well. But we'll see how it goes. But if I had to make a decision today, I would say no. But I do think that as we get closer to September, we're probably going to get more comfortable, unless we see some changes in the negative way over the next month or so here. Then maybe we'll change our minds. But we'll see what happens. But right now, a couple of months, we're probably going to be okay. We're comfortable with the plans that have been put together by that university, and we'll let her go.
Yeah. Well, thanks for giving us that information. I know a lot of parents have the same angst about the fall. We have one question from South Africa. It's on my list to travel to, by the way, and it's a school I've never heard of. So I'm going to come, Benita, I'm going to come visit you there when we can get the airplanes going across the world again. And it's about how long will our orientations be? So we're going to ask you guys, I don't know if you're heavily involved with orientation, but it's a little off topic, but it was the last question here. Are you guys still doing orientations, and any information for Benita from South Africa?
I can jump in there because orientation is also under my wheelhouse. So we're having a really busy summer, and it's going to look very different. And once we finalize what our move-in schedule it will be, which will be necessarily, in order to reduce density, be phased in and scheduled and appointed by appointment over the course of days, that really shifts how we manage orientation, since we're not going to have all of our incoming and new students arriving on the same day. So we're shifting how we work with our orientation assistants, how we work with our RAs, and I'm actually pretty excited because it gives us another opportunity for those two student leader positions to work even more closely together. And so we're going to be really coordinating the work that RAs and OAs do over the course of days. There will be a lot of all of the big events will be virtual, and we'll focus on those small groups of maybe 20 to 25 socially distanced and finding spaces on campus for those events to happen. But it'll be spread out a little longer for some of our students. And so we're in the throes of working through those details now. I am concerned about, well, I'll wait for that. Other orientation thoughts?
Anybody else on orientation? I know we're running short on time, and I want to thank everybody. Look, I think we all need these Zoom presentations like a hole in the head in terms of how often we're on these calls, but this is to have 400 people listen in. Carrie Ann, Brian, Maggie, Henry, I know how busy things are for you guys right now. To take an hour and spend time with us today, I really do appreciate it, to make the industry better. Just quickly, Spencer, before I turn it back to you, is we with Cushman and Wakefield put together a readiness guide. It's available on the website for free. It's got some good information. Certainly doesn't have all the answers, but there's some good information in there from our years of experience. Feel free to download that. And again, I want to thank everybody for their time today. Stay healthy out there, and let's hopefully have a great fall for higher education. Spencer, any closing remarks?
Certainly want to echo your thanks to this panel for coming together. What an outstanding group, great conversation. Really helpful when the microphone's on your mouth. I did put those links in the chat that you just talked about on that slide. So if you're attending this session, please grab one of those links. And we'll be, ACUHO-I will putting together a post-event guide that we'll send out to all of our registrants. That'll include the video recording. It'll include a summary document that was talked about. We'll also make sure that these links get in there as well. So really thank you for spending an hour today. Great insights from our panelists and really active Q&A. Again, every time you put a question in the Q&A, whether it gets answered or not, we record that, and we use that to guide our future virtual roundtable topics and our future research initiatives that we have at ACUHO-I. So thank you again for spending time with us. Thank you, panel. Brailsford and Dunleavy, thank you for a great week of content with ACUHO-I. So thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.